Hi everybody, I am back. I hope you're all doing really, really well and you're all good. I've just realised the irony of reading Halloween Party after Halloween. How apt would it have been to do it on Halloween? Oh well. Okay, so we're going to be heading into chapter 3 now. So I don't know if anyone is familiar with Agatha Christie, probably. But this book involves Poirot, who Agatha Christie actually didn't like very much. Little fun fact there for you. Okay, so chapter 3. In a flat in London, the telephone bell rang. The owner of the flat, Hercule Poirot, stirred in his chair. Disappointment attacked him. He knew before he answered it what it had meant. His friend Solly, with whom he'd been going to spend the evening reviving their never-ending controversy about the real culprit in the Canning Road Municipal Baths murder, was about to say that he could not come. Poirot, who had collected certain bits of evidence in favour in his own somewhat far-fetched theory, was deeply disappointed. He did not think his friend Solly would accept his suggestions, but he had no doubt that when Solly in his turn produced his own fantastic beliefs, he himself, Hercule Poirot, would just as easily be able to demolish them in the name of sanity, logic, order, and method. It was annoying, to say the least of it, if Solly did not come this evening, but it is true that when they had met earlier in the day, Solly had been racked with a chesty cough and was in a state of highly infectious catarrh. He had a nasty cold, said Hercule Poirot, and no doubt, in spite of the remedies that I have handy here, he would probably have given it to me. It is better that he should not come. Tout de même, he added, with a sigh. It will mean that now I shall pass a dull evening. Many of the evenings were dull now, Hercule Poirot thought, in his mind, magnificent as it was, for he had never doubted that fact, required stimulation from outside sources. He had never been of philosophic cast of mind. There were times he almost regretted that he had not taken to the study of theology, instead of going into the police force in his early days. The number of angels who could dance on the point of a needle. It would be interesting to feel that mattered and to argue passionately on the point with one's colleagues. His manservant, George, entered the room. It was Mr. Solomon Levy, sir. Ah, yes, said Hercule Poirot. He very much regrets that he will not be able to join you this evening. He was in bed with a serious bout of flu. He has not got flu, said Hercule Poirot. He has only a nasty cold. Everyone always thinks they have flu. It sounds more important. One gets more sympathy. The trouble with a catarrhal cold is that it's hard to clean the proper amount of sympathetic consideration from one's friends. Just as well he isn't coming here, sir, really, said George. Those colds in the head are very infectious. Wouldn't it be good for you to go down with one of those? It would be extremely tedious, Poirot agreed. The telephone bell rang again. And now who has a cold? He demanded. I have not asked anyone else. George crossed towards the telephone. I will take the call here, said Poirot. I have no doubt that it is nothing of interest, but at any rate, he shrugged his shoulders. It will perhaps pass the time, who knows? George said, Very good, sir, and left the room. Poirot stretched out a hand, raised the receiver, thus stilling the clamour of the bell. Hercule Poirot speaks, he said, with a certain grandeur of manner designed to impress whoever was at the other end of the line. That's wonderful, said an eager voice, a female voice, slightly impaired with breathlessness. I thought you'd be sure to be out, that you wouldn't be there. Why should you think that? Inquired Poirot. Because I can't help feeling that nowadays things always happen to frustrate one. You want someone in a terrible hurry, you feel you can't wait, and you have to wait. I wanted to get hold of you urgently, absolutely urgently. And who are you? Asked Hercule Poirot. The voice, a female one, seemed surprised. Don't you know? It said incredulously. Yes, I know, said Hercule Poirot. You are my friend, Arandine. And I'm in a terrible state, she said. Yes, yes, I can hear that. Have you also been running? You are very breathless, are you not? I haven't exactly been running. It's emotion. Can I come and see you at once? Poirot left a few moments elapse before he answered. His friend, Mrs. Oliver, sounded in a highly excitable condition. Whatever was the matter with her, she would no doubt spend a very long time pouring out her grievances, her woes, her frustrations, or whatever was ailing her. Once having established herself within Poirot's sanctum, it might be hard to induce her to go home without a certain amount of impoliteness. The things that incited Mrs. Oliver were so numerous and frequently so unexpected that one had to be careful how one embarked upon a discussion of them. Something has upset you? Yes, of course I'm upset. I don't know what to do. I don't know. Oh, I don't know anything. What I feel is that I've got to come and tell you just what's happened, for you're the only person who might know what to do. Who might tell me what I ought to do? So, can I come? But certainly, I shall be delighted to receive you. The receiver was thrown down heavily at the other end, and Poirot summoned George, reflected a few minutes, and then ordered a lemon barley water, bitter lemon, and a glass of brandy for himself. Mrs. Oliver will be here in about 10 minutes, he said. George withdrew. He returned with the brandy for Poirot, who accepted it with a nod of satisfaction, and George then proceeded to take the teetotal refreshment that was the only thing that was likely to appeal to Mrs. Oliver. Poirot took a sip of brandy delicately, fortifying himself for the ordeal which was about to descend upon him. It's a pity, he murmured to himself, that she is so scatty, and yet she has originality of mind. It could be that I am going to enjoy what she is coming to tell me. It could be, he reflected a minute, that it may take a great deal of the evening, and that it will all be excessively foolish. Bien, one must take one's risks in life. A bell sounded. A bell on the outside door of the flat this time. It was not a single pressure of the button. It lasted for a very long time, with a kind of steady action that was very effective, the sheer making of noise. Assuredly, she has excited herself, said Poirot. He heard George go to the door and open it, and before any decorous announcement could be made, through the door of his sitting room opened, and Mrs. Oliver charged through it, with George in tow behind her, hanging on to something that looked like a fisherman's souster and oilskins. What on earth are you wearing? Said Poirot. Let George take it from you, it's very wet. Of course it's wet, said Mrs. Oliver. It's very wet out. I never thought about water before. It's a terrible thing to think of. Poirot looked at her with interest. Will you have some lemon barley water? He said, or could I persuade you to a small glass of eau de vie? I hate water, said Mrs. Oliver. Poirot looked surprised. I hate it. I've never thought about it before. What it can do and everything. My dear friend, said Poirot, as George extracted her from the flapping folds of watery oilskin. Come and sit down here. Let George finally relieve you of what it is you're wearing. I got it in Cornwall, said Mrs. Oliver. Oilskins. A real proper fisherman's oilskin. Very useful to him, no doubt, said Poirot, but not, I think, so suitable for you. Heavy to wear. But come, sit down and tell me. I don't know how, said Mrs. Oliver, sinking into a chair. Sometimes, you know, I can't really feel it's true. But it happened, it really happened. Tell me, said Poirot. That's what I've come for, but now I've got here, it's so difficult because I don't know where to begin. At the beginning, suggested Poirot, or is that too conventional a way of acting? I don't know when the beginning was, not really. It could have been a long time ago, you know. Calm yourself, said Poirot. Gather together the various threads of matter in your mind and tell me. What is it that has so upset you? It would have upset you too, said Mrs. Oliver. At least, I suppose it would. She looked rather doubtful. One doesn't know, really, what does upset you. You take so many things with a lot of calm. It's often the best way, said Poirot. All right, said Mrs. Oliver. It began with a party. Ah, yes, said Poirot, relieved to have something as ordinary and sane as a party presented to him. A party, you went to a party and something happened. Do you know what a Halloween party is? Said Mrs. Oliver. I know what Halloween is, said Poirot. The 31st of October. He twinkled slightly as he said, when witches ride on broomsticks. There were broomsticks, said Mrs. Oliver. They gave prizes for them. Prizes? Yes, for who brought the best decorated ones. Poirot looked at her rather doubtfully. Originally relieved at the mention of a party, he had now felt slightly doubtful. Since he knew that Mrs. Oliver did not partake of spirituous liquor, he could not make one of the assumptions that she might have made in any other case. A children's party, said Mrs. Oliver, or rather an 11-plus party. 11-plus, said Poirot. Well, that's what they used to call it, in schools. I mean, they see how bright you are, and if you're bright enough to pass your 11-plus, you can go on to a grammar school or something. But if you're not so bright enough, you go to something called a secondary modern. A silly name. It doesn't seem to mean anything. I do not, I confess, really understand what you're talking about, said Poirot. They seem to have got away from parties and entered into the realms of education. Mrs. Oliver took a deep breath and began again. It started, really, she said, with the apples. Ah, yes, said Poirot, it would. It always might with you, mightn't it? He was thinking to himself as a small car on a hill, and a large woman getting out of it, and a bag of apples breaking, and the apples running and cascading down the hill. Yes, he said encouragingly, apples. Bobbing for apples, said Mrs. Oliver. That's one of the things you do at a Halloween party. Ah, yes, I think I've heard of that, yes. You see, all sorts of things were being done. There was bobbing for apples, and cutting sixpence off a tumblerful of flour, and looking in a looking-glass. To see your true love's face, suggested Poirot knowledgeably. Ah, said Mrs. Oliver, you're beginning to understand at last. A lot of old folklore, in fact, said Poirot. And this all took place at your party. Yes, it was all a great success. It finished up with snapdragon, burning raisins in a great dish. I suppose, her voice faltered. I suppose that must be the actual time when it was done. When what was done? A murder. After the snapdragon, everyone went home, said Mrs. Oliver. That, you see, was when they couldn't find her. Find whom? A girl called Joyce. Everyone called her name and looked around and asked if she'd gone home with anyone else. And her mother got rather annoyed and said that Joyce must have felt tired or ill or something and gone off by herself. And that was very thoughtless of her not to leave word. All of the sorts of things that mothers say when things like that happen. But anyway, we couldn't find Joyce. And she had gone home by herself? Asked Poirot. No, said Mrs. Oliver. She hadn't gone home. Her voice faltered. We found her in the end. In the library. That's where someone did it, bobbing for apples. The bucket was there, a big galvanised bucket. They wouldn't have the plastic one. Perhaps if they'd had the plastic one, it wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have been heavy enough. It might have tipped over. What happened? Said Poirot. His voice was sharp. That's where she was found, said Mrs. Oliver. Someone had shoved her head down into the water with the apples. Shoved her down and held her there so that she was dead, of course. Drowned. Just in a galvanised iron bucket nearly full of water. Kneeling there, sticking her head down to bob at an apple. I hate apples, said Mrs. Oliver. I never want to see an apple again. Poirot looked at her. He stretched out a hand and filled a small glass of cognac. Drink this, he said. It will do you good. And that is chapter 3. Short but sweet. Okay, so I think this is where it's going to start to get a little bit juicier. You may notice I have a very slight stammer. I kind of trip over my own words. I think it's because I talk too quickly, but I'm not sure really. So I'll try and slow down in future videos. Please let me know if this is something that you want me to continue. Hopefully I'll actually finish this series. So the next one will be chapter 4. There's a fair few chapters in this book. I think there are 26. But they're all quite short, so it shouldn't take too long to get through. Please let me know if you're enjoying this or if you'd rather listen to something else. I hope you'll have a wonderful sleep, a wonderful day tomorrow. Stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I'll speak to you soon.